Such a cool one you have
It's
for
a
us.
story I had never heard of before, which is stunning because she was the first female $1 million athlete. We'll dig into that a little bit later. Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for being with us. We're going to begin our show this morning with the Trump administration's recently launched trade war with America's three biggest trading partners. U.S. markets bounced back on Wednesday after President Trump granted U.S. automakers a one-month exemption on what would have been a 25% tariff on new cars and auto parts coming out of Canada and Mexico.
The White House revealed that the big three car makers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, requested a reprieve. Those companies need more time to prepare. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt offered this update on the tariff roller coaster yesterday.
We spoke with the big three auto dealers. We are going to give a one-month exemption on any autos coming through USMCA. Reciprocal tariffs will still go into effect on April 2nd. But at the request of the companies associated with USMCA, the president is giving them an exemption for 1 month so they are not at an economic disadvantage.
In a few moments, we will get an update from White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist on the efforts to cut the federal government. But first, let's get the latest on tariffs from NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Brian, good morning. So explain to us how this auto exemption deal works. Is 1 month enough time for these automakers to deal with the tariffs?
Yeah, well, so again, just to kind of set the stage, midnight into Tuesday, the president slapped that 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada. But then yesterday, we got the announcement that there would be this carve out, this exemption for the automakers. And by the way, it's not just the U.S. automakers. It's any automaker that's in compliance with the USMCA, which was that trade agreement that was negotiated under Trump with Canada and Mexico in 2020. So this could be BMW, this could be Toyota, these could be foreign automakers that build in North America. The reason for why they wanted this carve out is because of the stat that I gave you, I believe a few days ago, where we said that the estimates for the cost that could be added to a car as a result of these tariffs could be in some cases as high as $12,000. Again, $12,000 because we get parts from Mexico. We assemble a lot of these cars in Canada. That would have made the cost astronomically higher to bring that back into the United States as it gets tariffed multiple times. Seems like the car makers getting that reprieve is very much welcome on Wall Street, with Ford shares rising over 5% yesterday.
Brian, we know the president spoke with Canada's prime minister yesterday in an effort to maybe meet in the middle when it comes to these tariffs. Could we see more exemptions like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's still other type of diplomacy that needs to happen between now and the weekend. And that's because we heard from Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, saying that she was looking at actually slapping their retaliatory tariffs and making an announcement sometime over the weekend. So, yes, there's going to be more dialogue that's probably going to happen between the United States and its partners to the north and south. But it does seem like the only exemption, the only relief that we got so far from these tariffs are actually the result of conversations between domestic producers here in the United States and the White House. As you mentioned at the lead up here, it was really the automakers that went to the White House and said, hey, let's talk about the way that these tariffs are structured. This is just really not a type of structure that would help us here because we are so intertwined, our economies between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. We can't uncouple that very quickly. That's the reason why the Trump administration gave them a month of reprieve. So maybe it's really more the the business side of the conversation that's going to be more impactful than, say, those phone calls with those politicians.
Brian, while we have you, let's ask you about the oil markets. Over the last few days, crude prices have been falling, in part because of this decision by OPEC Plus to push ahead with plans to increase output in April. Help us understand what's going on here and how this tariff debate plays into everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point that you make up because OPEC is kind of the major driver of the price changes that we've seen in oil right now. They are the major supplier around the world. But when it comes to the tariffs, there are major implications for the price of American gasoline as well. And the reason why is because we bring in so much Canadian crude, we refine it in the United States, and then that's the type of fuel that we put into our cars every day. So when you look at the prices at the pump, we haven't seen the immediate tariffs yet because of the fact that, well, they only took place at midnight on Tuesday. But we have some estimates, like from Gas Buddy, that prices specifically in the Northeast could rise as much as like 20 cents per gallon after a few weeks of these tariffs being implemented. So again, the kind of prolonged nature of these tariffs could be very impactful to the prices that we see at the pump.
All right, Brian, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Let's switch gears now to the Trump administration's ongoing efforts to scale back the federal workforce.
Yeah, the man spearheading that, of course, Elon Musk, met with Republican lawmakers last night to discuss the work of his Department of Government Efficiency. Let's bring in our White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist on this. Hey, Aaron, good morning. So we've watched in the last week or so as Republicans have gone home to their districts. They face these crowds that are angry over what DOJ is doing in town halls and things like that, and how they're going about it. What came out of this meeting between Musk and congressional Republicans?
So let me remind you first that Elon Musk has said he believes that he can save the government $1 trillion through the work that he and his Doge team have been doing. The meetings yesterday, two separate meetings, one with Senate Republicans, the other with House Republicans. And I think the big headline out of these meetings was what came out of the meeting with Senate Republicans in particular, where there was discussion about making these Doge cuts permanent. Elon Musk was introduced to the idea of a rescission proposal, which effectively would claw back the monies that are appropriated for different programs and agencies and efforts that would make, again, these cuts that he's been making permanent. We're told that he was happy about that option, the possibility of not having to deal with legal challenges, not having to deal with questions around the president's authority to not spend money that's already been appropriated. And so this is now something that Elon Musk has in his pocket as he's going through these federal agencies, making these cuts in both budgets and funding and in workforce. Joe and Savannah.
Aaron, speaking of cuts, there's a report in the Wall Street Journal. NBC News has not independently confirmed it, but it says the president is expected to issue an executive order as early as today that would abolish the Department of Education. Tell us what the Journal is reporting here, and how could something so significant like this actually happen in reality? What would it look like?
Yeah, so this reporting in the Journal does line up with some of what we've been expecting to come over the last several weeks in particular. You'll remember that the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, was just confirmed on Monday, and at that time she sent a message to staffers at the Department of Education saying that her vision is very much aligned with President Trump's vision to send education back to the states. This message that went out was titled Final Mission for the Department of Education. And so she talked about the idea of restoring oversight of education programs to the states. And she said that that restoration would result in a profound impact on staffing, on budgets, on operations at the federal Department of Education. And so the expectation with that is that she's going to start doing the things over the next several months that would very much look like eliminating the major functions of the department. She said during her confirmation hearing that she acknowledged that Congress would be needed in order to fully eliminate the department. But she said that the goal is not to stop funding programs that are important, programs that need to be funded for children's education. But she said that it might make more sense to move some of those programs, some of that oversight, under other departments when it comes to young people, students who have disabilities and things of that nature. She thought that HHS might be better equipped to handle that sort of oversight, Savannah and Joe.
Aaron, also another potential cut here, Veterans Affairs. It looks like that department's bracing for mass layoffs. What are we expecting there, and what impact would that have?
Well, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs posted, I think it was about a 4-minute video on social media yesterday explaining that he's looking to cut about 15% of the workforce at the Department of Veterans Affairs. By our math, that would equal probably about 80,000 workers. We know that in that first round of cuts that we saw across the federal government, folks who took the buyout, some of them were at the Department of Veterans Affairs. There have also been probationary employees there who've been laid off already. And so now the Secretary making clear that he intends to cut potentially 80,000 workers from that agency. He said that he would be able to do that without affecting health care, without affecting benefits. The pushback on that has been, how do you cut so many positions and think that it wouldn't have any impact on the agency's ability to serve its constituency? And so that's some of the concern. But the Secretary said very bluntly in his message that he's going to be making major changes, so get used to it.
All right, Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much.
Now, these efforts to remake the federal government are facing some major legal hurdles. And yesterday, the Supreme Court sided with a federal judge who ordered the administration to pay out $2 billion to foreign aid groups. It's money that was already owed. That was already owed for contracts with the U.S. Agency for International Development, better known as USAID.
It comes after President Trump issued an executive order last month that froze funding to USAID programs as it reevaluates foreign aid. Well, that led major contractors, including the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition and the Global Health Council, to file lawsuits in which they claimed they were owed money.
NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley has been covering this case. He joins us now, and our legal analyst Danny Savalos is here with us on set. Lawrence, let's start with you and your reporting. The order was unsigned. That was 1 page long. There was a dissent. That was 8 pages long. So where was the split, and what was the reason the majority sided with this federal judge?
Yeah, so welcome to the opaque world of the Supreme Court, because in these orders, they often don't explain why they're ruling the way they did, and the majority didn't explain. We can sort of infer from it that they thought that the federal judge was kind of doing what federal judges do. He had issued a temporary restraining order 2 weeks ago, and he felt like the government wasn't complying, and that's why he issued another order requiring the government to pay up this money. And the dissent, though, we do hear from them. Justice Samuel Alito wrote at length saying he was stunned by what the court had done because he thought that the judge was imposing on the executive branch's authority to pay its bills and decide who it's going to pay. So we can infer from that there are 4 justices who don't agree with the majority. And interestingly, in the majority, you had the 3 liberal justices joined by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, 2 of the conservative members of the court.
Danny, this is a pretty narrow ruling, though, ultimately, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's the case with a lot of this litigation involving Trump executive orders. Yes, you can call it a win or a defeat for Trump, but this is really a skirmish in the overall war because at this stage, we're dealing with temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. These are all things that almost by definition don't go to the merits of the case. They are a pause, a preservation of the status quo. And in this case, that preservation of the status quo is forcing the government to pay out these invoices, these bills. Now, of course, the government argues, and Justice Alito pointed out, that preserving the status quo ordinarily doesn't mean forcing someone to pay out $2 billion. It's an interesting point. But ultimately, the final issue of whether or not the government has to pay out these bills isn't even before any of these, well, not the Supreme Court right now. These are all pauses. The real issue is still being litigated on the merits. So we don't yet know the answer to whether or not the executive branch can simply say, hey, Congress appropriated these funds, they passed these laws. We just don't feel like paying it because it's our money, the executive branch money.
So, Lawrence, when we talk about the narrow issue, what do we know about what this money was going toward? And when will these contractors get paid, especially when you consider that a good chunk of the USAID staff no longer has a job?
Yeah, so as we've heard, it's a fast-moving case. There's actually a hearing today, but in the district court, and the judge has also asked for the government to sort of file some papers explaining, what the current status is in terms of who's being paid what and when they might be able to pay them. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, these are all for work that has already been done. This lawsuit in the district court involves much broader claims which weren't at issue before the Supreme Court. So we're just talking here in this Supreme Court action about this $2 billion, which still hasn't been paid as far as we're aware. And the Supreme Court didn't actually order them to pay it. It just means that the district court can move forward with his hopes that they will pay at some point. And as this covers all kinds of contracts across the world, including water irrigation projects, including in Ukraine, some anti-malaria programs in Africa, and healthcare supplies and things like that in Asia. So a lot of things covered by this.
Danny, we expect to see an influx of legal challenges, whether that be from USAID and anything else going on there, or any of these other federal agencies that are sort of being reshaped as the Trump administration is saying. Does this ruling give you a hint as to how those may go?
Yes, we know, in my view, the Trump administration's plan is a pretty straightforward one. Fire out all these executive orders. They cost nothing. They cost the price of a piece of paper and a Sharpie. Get them out there and then just see what the courts do. And if you don't like it, go back to the drawing board. That's why I caution folks, don't look at these as defeats or victories for the Trump administration because of their ability. It's almost like they've exploited a loophole in the executive branch where they can just try out all these executive orders, see what happens, and if they're pruned like the proverbial bonsai tree, great. If they get struck down, no big deal. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
All right. Lawrence and Danny, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Well, now let's get to the latest on those deadly storms that have been sweeping across the country this week. Since Monday, at least 13 tornadoes have touched down across 5 states, including Mississippi, where at least 3 people are dead and buildings were ripped apart. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has the details.
Residents tell us that the storm blew through in a matter of seconds, and in just that short amount of time, you can see the damage left behind. This home completely torn apart. You can just see the frame. Meanwhile, part of the home ended up in the pool. Extreme weather striking all corners of the country. A powerful line of storms unleashing hurricane-force winds in the Carolinas.
This is insane.
And whiteout conditions in the Midwest, grounding flights, making a mess on the roads, even shutting down parts of the interstate in Nebraska. The South recovering from torrential downpours and ferocious flash flooding. The storms being blamed for at least 3 deaths and several injuries in Mississippi. Hard-hit Wayne County was still recovering from last month's EF3 tornado that damaged dozens of homes. They're finding their way forward after another likely tornado.
Just kind of came out of nowhere. It was a really scary 15 seconds.
Supper turned into survival mode for Lynn Smith and her family.
I've never prayed so hard in 15 seconds in my life. We walked from right there to right here and just got on the floor and put some pillows over our heads and prayed for the best.
Since Monday, at least 13 tornadoes have been confirmed across 5 states, and peak severe weather season is still weeks away.
This is a preview of what's to come.
Potentially, just looking at the overall picture, usually March, April is when it really starts to heat up.
As a late winter storm now races east, the mid-Atlantic in the bullseye for damaging winds and downpours. Kathy Park, NBC News.
And let's get the latest on the severe winter storm and what to expect next with your Morning News Now weather.
Angie Lastman joins us now. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. I've got some good news when it comes to that winter storm. It's moving out. We're going to see some improvements, but we've got kind of a couple of spots that'll see some lasting impacts. That's specifically focused across the Great Lakes in the Northeast for now. We've also got kind of an active pattern setting up out west. We've got a couple of storm systems we're going to track over the next few days that could become cross-country systems. We'll get to that here in a moment, but let's talk about that exiting winter storm. It's moving out, taking most of the heavy rain with it, but notice these cold winds coming across the lakes. You know what that means. It means the lake effect snow bands are going to kind of still be leaving us with some additional snowfall across the interior portions of the Northeast through the day today. Snowfall amounts, not all that impressive, but we could see a couple of spots dealing with some difficult travel on those roadways, especially in those higher elevations. Notice, though, the wind alerts, they're holding on strong. We've got 69 million people stretching from the Appalachians up into portions of New England, including parts of Michigan as well. And this is because our winds once again expected to be 30 to 40 plus miles per hour through the day today. So heads up, the trees, the power lines, all of that same kind of stuff that we saw yesterday. Our winds aren't quite as strong, but we could still see those be issues through our afternoon hours today. On top of that, out west, we've got plenty of winter alerts. You can see them stretch from the Great Basin to the Rockies. And we've got basically some heavy snow that's going to set up from our first system that's working across that region through the day today. Now, there's a secondary front you'll notice that's going to hang out right around Southern California. It's going to bring a batch of some rain, much needed rain, I will say, across that region. So they'll have to deal with that today. Tomorrow, improvement for California. We'll see drier conditions, but the desert Southwest will start to become unsettled as that system works east. And we'll also see kind of this narrow band of snow set up over parts of the Midwest and the Great Lakes. It'll have a little rain associated with it as well. So we'll deal with a little bit of that kind of slowdown when it comes to those couple of regions, guys. Snowfall totals, maybe a foot in some of the higher elevations. So holding on to winter in some spots.
They're used to it.
They're used to it.
All right. Thanks, Angie.
You got it.
Well, NBC News has some exciting news of its own to share this morning. Over the summer, NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas will take over as anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News. The network announced yesterday that Yamas will succeed longtime anchor, the beloved Lester Holt, when he steps down from the role.
Yamas is a senior national correspondent and has anchored his show Top Story right here on News Now since 2021. He says anchoring nightly news is a, quote, profound honor and one that carries tremendous responsibility. Yamas will become the first Latino journalist to host the weeknight edition of Nightly News when he starts his new job over the summer, and he will continue to anchor Top Story right here on NBC News Now. We are very excited for Tom and wish him all the best.
Tom.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.